No. Taunting us.
Hello, I'm Owen Guthrie, and I'd like to welcome you to our fourth and final Teaching Tip Live of the 2014 fall season. Today's Google Hangout on Air is being brought to you live by UF eLearning from HooDoo Brewery in Fairbanks, Alaska. We are very fortunate to have with us today UAF faculty members Dr. Chris Hartman from the Department of Computer Science, Dr. Karen Taylor from the Department of Communication, and Mr. Bobby Wilkin from HooDoo Brewing Company. He's the owner here. And we have eLearning's very own instructional designers, Dan Lasota, Kristen Buffard, and myself, Owen Guthrie. We're going to have a very engaging Teaching Tip Live discussion today, and we're going to be talking about ways to enrich teaching with field research experiences. But before we jump into that, I want to touch on a couple points of business. For those of you hoping to see us imbibe some of the HooDoo's fine product and Mr. Wilkins' research, we're sorry to disappoint you, but today we're here for strictly academic purposes. Secondly, we have many viewers today from outside the UAF community, and I want to remind you that eLearning and at UAF provides many engaging online courses, including several completely free degree programs. It isn't too late to register for spring classes. Please go to the website and do so, and have a look at the courses we offer. Secondly, if you'd like to participate in today's conversation, we are running the Q&A app. And I forgot to click on that earlier. We are running the Q&A app today, and please submit your questions, and our panel will be very pleased to respond. So, with that, I'd like to pass the microphone over to Dan Lasota and company for our Hangout on Air.
All right, well, I promise we'll talk just a short bit here. The topic is research in the classroom, and not research itself, but the practice of research and how it might, through the practice of it, make your classroom experience, hopefully for you, but more importantly for your students, a little bit better. So before I began kind of tackling this subject, I did something that's atypical for me. I actually did some research on the research, and I looked up, and there was a nice article that reviewed about 140, 150 or so articles, and across the board, the researchers turned up what appears to be absolutely no correlation between the productivity of one's research, in other words, how many papers you produce, how much your budget is. It has nothing at all to do with your classroom teaching experience and the experience of your students. And as you can well imagine, there's really good researchers that might not be good teachers. But that's not necessarily the case. Some of the best teachers are good researchers, and in fact, some of the best teachers aren't researchers at all. And we have all sorts of instructors in Fairbanks. But really what this talk and this discussion is about is, let's bring the correlation from zero to something more meaningful. If we purposefully understand what research can do in the classroom, engage the students, then we'll hopefully take the experience, which is really centuries old, of the expert in a field just always lecturing. The experience for the student is always been a passive receptor. They take notes, they recite things, but they don't, more often than the case, they're not engaged in the material, and so the learning tends not to be as deep and meaningful. And what you really want to do, and hopefully with research, is use it to engage your students. They're now, they have a career path. They're engaged in commerce. They're much more engaged in the subject. And at UAF, we've got a lot of great things going for us at the university. There's, in this year alone, there's $123 million being spent on research, and that, again, it doesn't directly equate to a classroom experience, but there's an opportunity there. There's, over the last 7-8 years, there's been 8,000 publications produced by our faculty members, and they've been cited many, many times. And so again, what's the opportunity there? What we would like to try and do is get to engage our students with what we're doing. And so we have 3 people here that are going to help us out. Chris Hartman and Karen Taylor can talk about what they're doing in the classroom, and not to bore any of the beer aficionados, but we will have Bobby, and he's going to talk to us about his product isn't the minds of his students, but the wonderful beer that we drink. And so Bobby's going to talk about what he does all the time and what people do in the craft beer industry to improve their product. And I think there really is a tie-in there. There's you see the enthusiasm of your customers and beer drinkers, and it's pretty high. And so if we can even just capture a little bit of that in the classroom, we know it's going to be a little bit better. So with that, Karen or Chris, which one of you guys would like to start, or maybe talking about something that works in your classroom that you could tie into what you do with research?
Sure. I'll go ahead and go first. I'm Chris Hartman, and I'm in the computer science department, and my PhD is actually in mathematics with concentrations in graph theory and combinatorics. And what I teach is programming, which means my research is mostly kind of what you imagine a mathematician might do. I sit with my feet on my desk and think about problems, or draw pictures of pretty graphs on the board and think about them. Where my teaching is more teaching people how to write computer programs, how to design software, or maybe in advanced graduate classes some theoretical type things, NP completeness proofs and things like that. So I actually don't have very much overlap between what I'm actually researching and what I'm teaching about. That said, the little overlap that there is, I use for examples. In my data structures class, I often, if I've written some code to do something, I can bring that up and say, here's a problem I actually had last week. Should I use a linked list or a vector or a queue or something like that? And in the graduate course, a similar thing happens. NP completeness is a big topic, and those proofs are numerous, but I'll present a couple from papers that I've done. And what I've found this does is engage the students more. They really like not just some faked up example problem, there are plenty of those in the book, but when I say this is something I did last week, here's some code I wrote and put it on the board, they pay attention. And
have you actually been kind of iffy on which way to go, and have you ever been influenced by something your students have done in class?
Not really. Usually they're more basic type questions where I know the answer and they should know the answer if they're paying attention, and they do. But the fact that it's a real problem instead of made up problem like elementary mathematics, you don't take a dozen donuts and divide them amongst 7 people. The kids are like, no, you just give everybody a donut. Well, this made up CS problems affect students the same way, and real world problems seem real. And also anecdotally, I noticed that even from amongst real world problems, ones that are something I did makes them pay a lot more attention. Saying I, somehow hey, this is actually, there's a reason that I would have to learn this. I'm going to use it in real life.
Do you find that the students too end up asking more questions then about
Definitely.
what you're talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
And that helps too. When you get questions from the students, the rest get more engaged.
Yeah.
So that's basically all I wanted to say, because I think most of the people out there are probably like me, waiting to hear what Bobby has to say. So.
Well, before Bobby chimes in on his research into the good product, Karen, how do you bring research into your classroom, whether yours or colleagues that you work with?
I have a much easier time of it because the joy of doing communication research is that it's very real for the students from the day one, and my research is not, in some ways, very established. Oftentimes there's not a right answer, and so I can't begin to guess what we should do with something. I study communication, and in terms of teaching, our undergraduate classes starts with public speaking, but the theory classes are the ones that I primarily do in organizational communication. So organizational communication, looking at internal communication and external communication. Today, that means digital. Everything has gone digital, obviously. And so one of the things that we do in terms of the research is we're doing a lot of new experiments with social networks. I hope that many of you will have tested this for yourselves. This is a typical network of Facebook, and you can do this quick and easy with your own Facebook page, get your own network graph of your Facebook friends. I used a tool from Wolfram Alpha, which is free, and everybody can go do that, but there's a lot of new tools, and they're changing really fast. This graph tells us a number of mildly interesting things. You can see the ways in which it's dominated by my graduate school friends. You can see the ways in which there's a very dense cluster from my undergraduate friends where everybody knows everybody and knows everybody else's everybody. And so you can see how dense that part of it is. And then you can see my high school friends and the ways in which that part has gotten much more scattered over the years. And you can see this in your own networks as well. The students are very quick to do this. It takes 5 minutes to upload their Facebook data. They're all on Facebook. And when we can start comparing, and we can start figuring out, okay, what difference does it make if, for example, we tweak the algorithms that we use with Wolfram Alpha, because they give us a lot of different tools. And what difference does that make? What new insights can you get if you do it this way compared to this way? And those are questions that we don't yet have really standardized answers to. Does it matter whether you're using a betweenness measure for centrality versus some of the other measures for centrality? We're still figuring it out. And in some ways, the fact that the students know their own network better than any researcher ever could, they can gain insights that are perhaps surprising. It's easier sometimes to see it, sorry.
Up there? You want to see the...
Yeah, that one, with a Facebook page that's public, where it's all accountable to everybody. So the graph here that you're seeing is the Galena rescue after the flooding last summer. The Facebook was the first organized response and was, I would argue, probably the most effective response all the way through the flood recovery. What you see with this graph is the immediate spike and then a drop-off as things get into motion with mini or smaller spikes in participation along the way. And what you see is here, initially there's an explosion. It's a decentralized, or rather, sorry, it's a centralized. The measures of centrality are going to be, right, you've got a very small number of people basically broadcasting. It functions like mass media for this initial one. But as you go down, you see as time progresses, that starts to change fairly rapidly. You can get the connections around the edge of it. And then by the time this miniature spike in the right at the 6th, not the 7th, roughly a little over a week later, it started to cohere and you get strong clustering. And that clustering remains actually fairly consistent during the rest of the recovery period. What does that tell us?
What does it tell us?
Okay,
But what did it tell your students? I mean, were they familiar with the Galena
Many
flooding
of them.
incident? Okay.
Many of my students are local. And even if they weren't themselves directly involved with flooding, the Yukon River floods all the way up and down. It is a regular enough occurrence. We all have some knowledge of how this kind of stuff plays out. So we formulate various hypotheses, and there's a lot of argument. We don't really have, even today, great answers. One of the arguments is how much of what you see in terms of the clustering here represents pre-existing social networks, then being picked up and represented directly digitally, versus how much of that is an artifact of you get that clustering because the people who are active digitally, right, there's a shift in the power structures of the town. And how much difference does that make that they've got this slightly different shift in clusters? How much difference does that make in the recovery effort? Do those structures now get represented? Do those become the new structure of the social network of the town?
What I think is interesting is you're taking your research analytical techniques and you're applying them to something that at least some of your students have actually lived through. So they remember the first stages of the flood where the agency put out information, and then people are probably, as the time went through from like May through July, they're talking about maybe what could happen and who can help out.
Right, and doing things like organizing local bake sales to fundraise. They're doing things like organizing drives when everybody would go as a group to the town site to do some of the cleaning efforts that weren't getting done.
Well, that's inherently going to be more meaningful than a textbook example of some, vague media event.
It's very applicable in their careers later because every organization should be tracking their network data. And there's a lot of tools for doing so, as I said. Here they have had a chance to, though, test different tools, different inputs, and apply it in their, like you said, ways they've seen.
So As students that are experimenting with these tools, do you find that they tell you that they're changing their own personal practice with their activity in social networks? Yeah.
Facebook is a great test case for this kind of thing. After they see for themselves, and perhaps you'll have some similar experience, the network graph and the ways in which it's oftentimes the people who respond are the ones who are most central to their network, and so they don't think about all the other clusters. They also probably are not usually inherently intimately aware of how connected their friends are, and how oftentimes, even when you've lived separate places and you wouldn't expect there to be connections from one group of friends to another, there are. We are a very connected society. That old story about 7 degrees of separation, that research was never tested, by the way. It's not a good piece of research. But that idea is an interesting one because it is surprising to almost everybody when they look at their own networks how the density is higher than any of them ever expect. And that means things for what you say to whom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to hop in there for just a moment. I'm going to remind our viewership. I see viewer numbers picking up a little bit. I'm going to remind you out there in the audience that we do have the Q&A app enabled. So if you have questions for our panel this afternoon, please send them in. We'd be happy to address them. Again, we're hearing from Dr. Chris Hartman in the Department of Computer Science, Dr. Karen Taylor at the Department of Communication, and in a moment we're going to hear from Bobby Wilkin, owner of HooDoo Brewery. And this Hangout on Air is brought to you live from HooDoo Brewery in Fairbanks, Alaska by UAF e-learning. And we actually just got a question in. It's a question from Mr. Mark Gaither, and he says, Professor Hartman, do your undergraduate students have the opportunity to do internships, i.e. work for local businesses or entities, so they too can gather valuable field experience, and how that relates to their course of study?
They do have the opportunity with several local companies to do internships, but most of that is not really through the university, although we do have some ways to give them credit for it if what they're doing is worthy of college credit. They'll work for GVA, the electric utility, and the oil companies, and things like that. Some of the governmental agencies, Fish and Game has had a computer science intern before, for instance.
Karen, or Chris too, that kind of leads to one of the benefits I read about in the literature was that you don't bring to the classroom not only your knowledge, but your research methods, but you also bring this this network of contacts. So if you see an interest in a particular student is interested in a particular aspect of your discipline, you can help connect that student to some research. And do you have any examples of that in your classrooms?
I do fairly readily. Most of my students
will
will end up doing some form of public relations, and so I set them up with interns, mostly from other alumni that graduated through the program, and that is a function of interpersonal connections. That takes time to develop. It's not really something that's easily institutionalized, and so it makes sense to me that you're here saying it's not really through the university.
Right. I was kind of going to say that in answer to Dan's question with just what you said, is most of my connections for that sort of thing are actually not through people I've researched with, but through alumni or other people that I was in contact with, through academics that when I went to school, I know this person, and now, so I don't know if that's from what I'm researching on as much as just connections.
Right. Well, remember, when the students are in your classroom, you are the university. That's the main thing. You're the main university presence in the classroom, or you should be anyway. Right? I mean, that's who they're paying attention to, and that's why they're there. What about the Office of Undergraduate Research? That's another way, and from my reading, the literature says that that's a good way to retain students in your program. It's a good way to pipeline them into graduate school, either in your program or in the discipline, and it's also a way to enhance their learning if they can actually get engaged in it. So I don't know if you have any stories or experiences of working with URSA from the university or undergraduate research. I know different disciplines are harder than others to do that in, but
that's kind of my answer, is that computer science research and particularly mathematics research mostly involve needing to learn everything that comes before it. And it's really hard to get undergraduates to do something that you would call research. Whereas I think in some of the sciences, you can help in biology research. You can be around in the lab and stick electrodes into rat brains,
Right.
or whatever. Quite
Well, there's a lot.
early on.
There's a lot of summer field research that happens on archaeology, biology, wildlife biology, etc.
What I do, I try to encourage my students to work on open source projects, which I think of as almost the same sort of thing. It's not research in the sense that, I mean, there are no papers, but there is a result, and their name is on something, and you get real-world experience.
And that usually gets them out working with a network as well, because
Exactly.
those open source projects are massively collaborative, from what I understand. And so
Yes.
talk about a networking opportunity,
Yep.
like pipelining into careers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think we've stalled enough. I think we've delayed, and you've been sitting here patiently listening, and I don't know if it brought back any memories of your university days, but I think what we're all interested in here is the kind of like ongoing research you do and how it makes your product better, and hopefully we won't have to stretch too much to make analogies back to the classroom.
Yeah, you know, it kind of all comes down to, for me, for this business, making quality beer, and we kind of do that in multiple ways. So I learned early on, when I first started getting interested in starting a brewery, I had a lot of really good beer and a lot of really bad beer, and so I knew there had to be some reason that the good beer was good. So I started to just learn as much as I could, and the more I learned, the more questions I had, and the more complicated the whole subject of beer making became. It's very easy to make beer. It's a real simple process, but it's not easy to make really good beer. It's very complicated and very precise. So the more I learned that I needed to learn more. So then when I said, I want to start a brewery and I want to do it tomorrow, it ended up taking about 15 years from that point to just say, I'm just going to take my time, learn until I just say, okay, now I'm ready to start a brewery. So I kind of stalled for about 5 years of just saying, I want to start a brewery. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And finally just said, I need some specific instruction. So I went to brewing school in Chicago in Germany, and then still did not feel like I still had so many questions because I'd never worked in a brewery. So decided to try and get some experience, and got a job in Juneau at Alaskan Brewing, and was actually just part of this brewing machine, and just learned so much. Did that for years, and then finally felt like I maybe know what I'm doing, possibly. So, but you know, our goal is just to make great beer, and I've been told that kind of everything else will follow that. That's the number one thing, just make great beer, and we do everything we can, and we do that by, of course, researching how great beer is made and how each specific step in the process, where those critical points are, where those critical temperatures, times, pressures, all these little things we do, all these little variables that we do to make the beer better. And that, you know, people have been brewing beer for 1,000 years or so. So there's a lot of early research, tried and true, really, techniques and recipes and ways to use different ingredients, and all the way up to kind of the modern, you know, the last 25, 30 years in the U.S., this kind of brewing revolution that we're in, that we're part of, is our brewery is a little brewery in Fairbanks, Alaska, and we're really a German-style brewery, where the Germans really took brewing to the next level. They kind of they figured out how to make beer. So we really take a lot from kind of the German brewing tradition, and we do a lot of little steps in the process that I learned during just through my learning and research and schooling and experience and experimentation.
Well, talk about the experimentation. I mean, when HooDoo started out, how many flavors of beer did you have? And then like
Two, yeah.
two. So I'm looking up on your board, and there's like 8 flavors there
Yeah.
right now, and there's some that I wish were there too.
Yeah, yeah.
From
Yeah,
the summer.
we made about 20 different beers.
Okay.
So we'll come by those recipes. Beer is the quality of beer comes from not only the recipe. You know, a lot of people think that there's a secret recipe for beer, and that's the key. But it's the technique and the process also, and the equipment and the control, all the control. You know, 500 years ago when they were making beer, they didn't have these beautiful stainless steel tanks, and they really didn't know what was going on compared to what we know now. You know,
Right.
So we kind of control this process.
Hey folks, we just lost our video feed, main video feed, but we'll be bringing that right back up, and we'll tune right back into our audience. Dan, that laptop dropped out of the Hangout, the other one. And that gives me a great opportunity to talk to you a little bit about how we're facilitating this Hangout today. One of our ulterior motives for conducting these Hangouts on air for our Teach and Tip Lives is to show how easy, and sometimes fraught with problems, but how easy conducting a Hangout on air can be. And it gives you, the instructor, the opportunity to bring your classroom to the world, or the world to your classroom. Today we're running off of just a couple of iPhones and a couple of laptops. The iPhones are acting as our point of connection to the internet, and the laptops are acting as our video and audio receptors and broadcasters. So if you're a faculty member on campus and you want to head out into the world, there's a lot of opportunity for you to either conduct experiments or research in the field and bring that into the classroom or into other people's classroom. And it also gives, they're laughing over there because I don't know why. But anyway, there is a lot of opportunity, and one of the things we hope to model is how easy it can be. And there are hiccups, just like there are with the overhead projector or the film strips of old in the face-to-face classroom. But they are solvable, and the power is tremendous. And figuring out how you might use that. What expert do you want to bring into your classroom?
Yeah, as long as there's
what field experience do you want to bring into your classroom? A lot of opportunity there. So we're back online, and Bobby was just talking to us about all the different varieties of
The UK
beer he's
IPA.
experimented.
So how many new mistakes
I'm
like
going to hand it
that
back
did you
over to
have?
Bill.
I mean, a real professional job there by not turning the on switch on my power strip. But how do little things like that work into your research process?
You know, well, we're constantly tracking everything we do. We're brewing today, and we have meticulous notes of everything we do. And there's lots of little processes we're doing, and we're noting everything. And something is bound to be different with this batch that we're brewing today, but we're trying to minimize that and making notes. We won't know how this beer truly turns out for a few weeks here. So if it turns out it over attenuates, basically over ferments, and isn't left as sweet as this beer should be, this is stout, then we can go back and say, well, what happened? You know, and try and learn from it. So we're constantly doing that. Brewers are not only trying to create new recipes and great recipes, but also trying to create the same recipe over and over and over again. Like let's say our Kolsch, we try and repeat that exactly. And so we're constantly looking back at all of our notes of all the batches we've made, and we're trying to repeat that process exactly, and note any variables and compensate for it later in the process.
So inevitably there's some variation in the process that you don't want, but it creeps in anyway.
Yeah. And
your data shows where it might have gone wrong or good. I mean, how many times does an accidental variation actually make the flavor better?
You know, it definitely happens. You know, sometimes let's say we'll lose power in our cooling unit that's keeping beer fermenting at the proper temperature, which that has happened, and our Kolsch, would ferment at a slightly higher temperature before we figured it out. And a lot of it with flavor, with sensory, is very kind of, I think that might taste better, and there's no real way to quantify that.
Right.
So we've definitely had, let's say when we dry hop an IPA, which is we put hops into the finished beer for more hop flavor in the end, if those hops are left in there basically for longer, that will definitely change the flavor. It could be for good, for bad. Every brewery is different. The dynamics and design of the tanks and things like that. But we try and objectively drink beer and and think about what the IPA tasted like a month ago, that last batch.
Right.
Which is hard because the flavor of that last batch, even if we still have some of it, it's constantly changing as it ages. So you can't have this keg of IPA that is the gold standard, and we'll just keep that around and keep tasting it, because in a month it'll taste completely different. In a year it'll taste horrible. So you're constantly trying to take that all the data, the times, the temperatures, what we're doing, and turn that into the same flavor. So we're trying to do the same process and hopefully end up with the same flavor. But it's also getting the raw materials and the barley, how it's malted. There's variations in those processes. The hops, the quality of the harvest, how those are processed. We're kind of at the whim of how those industries give us those raw materials. So sometimes those vary, and we really have no control over that.
So you have a lot of variation that just happens.
Mm-hmm.
But what about what kind of work have you done, if any, that you're actually introducing variation on purpose, like a totally new flavor, or and we talked a little bit about yeast research.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to say about that?
We don't do a lot of yeast research per se, I guess. But we do use several different yeast strains, and we try and track the fermentation data. We'll this one that's bubbling behind us is a new Saison yeast, this Belgian yeast that we've never used before. So we're tracking that and monitoring.
Still hear their audio, I think, but the camera has gone to sleep. You want to just hit the button on the camera there, Dan? It'll wake it up. Yeah, we'll be right back with you there. This is not a critical failure like the last one, but this does give me a good opportunity to mention that now would be a good time to ask Bobby your questions, or any of the other panelists. I see we're already coming back, so I'm not going to sit in here very long, but I just want to remind you, use the Q&A app, ask us some questions, we'll be happy to respond. But back to you.
But we'll track how well that yeast is fermenting as it goes through this fermentation of this beer we brewed about a week ago, and it's completely different than any yeast we've ever
Hi, folks. This is Owen again. I think, Kristen, is it possible that microphone cable got pulled? I just heard the audio drop out. That one, out of the bottom of the mic. There, it's back. Very good. We're good.
But other than kind of tracking our internal data, and then there's lots of context in the industry that I go through to just get as much information as I can to make decisions to make the beer delicious. It all comes back to that.
How much how much feedback, or how important is your paying students their feedback? I mean,
well, we look at the kind of the volume sold basically every night, and so we'll make a single batch of a new beer, and basically put it on tap, and then we will just watch it, and then if it's pretty obvious to see that a couple of our beers have kind of a constant volume. The Kolsch and the IPA, those have a constant volume. Other beers vary depending on what else is on tap. If there's two IPAs on tap, they'll kind of split the IPA drinkers, and so we'll watch that. But if we have a new beer come on, then if we see, oh man, it's a hit, then we'll consider ordering more ingredients and try to keep it supplied. But usually it will, generally the new beers we'll do a single batch of, which is about 500 gallons, and usually that will run out before we don't have enough warning. But but we keep a direct eye on volume all the time, daily and weekly, monthly, and all that. Just to we have the great thing about this brewery is that we have direct data all the time of the beers we're selling and what people like, because that basically means what they like. And if when we come out with a new beer and it's, say, like our pumpkin beer, there's a big surge of, let's say, growler fills while people kind of try it. They take it home and try it. But then, 2 weeks later, if we're still getting a good volume of growler fills, that means people actually like it. They're repeatedly filling them up. So that really tells us a lot, too, to see if they're repeatedly coming back.
Do you get anything other than the just raw volume? Do you have people who report to you?
Well, a lot of people will say to me, "This is the best beer I've ever had. I love this beer. It's a great beer. I like that one better." I don't really get the "this beer sucks." Not many people say that to my face, right? And so that's kind of to be expected. So not really. I get a lot of "I love your beer."
They can't pinpoint exactly what it is that's different.
No, there are definitely some of our customers, and we have a lot of regulars that are in here either daily, weekly, or monthly. There are a few that really will tell it like it is, and they'll say, "I don't like this batch. Did something something a little different about this one?" And I'm totally honest. I'll say, "Actually, yeah, we're trying this new yeast, or we're trying this different process." I'm upfront about that. But most people are just very supportive because they're having when you have a pint in front of you at 5 o'clock, you're usually pretty jazzed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I got a question from the viewer online. This question is again from Mr. Mark Gaither, and it appears he may know something about brewing. He says, "Bobby, can you simply compare and contrast old school processes such as decoction versus new processes such as step mashing, and how technology and instrumentation has changed the beer making process?"
I believe the question was if we to kind of compare decoction mashing with step mashing, and I kind of missed the last part there.
Just comparing old school versus new school.
Yeah. Decoction mashing would be where you're taking the mash, which is the grain in the water, and in order to heat it to a new temperature, you'll remove some of the mash into another vessel and then boil that, and then add it back to the mash itself to raise the temperature. Nowadays, we have the technology to just have the mash in a heated vessel that we can precisely control the temperature with steam jackets. Decoction mashing is kind of a mixed bag. A lot of people, especially in Germany, think that that is a key part of certain beer styles. It adds a certain richness of flavor, where step mashing you kind of lose that. Same would go for like a direct fired kettle, which has a flame under it that's actually got a small area that's very, very hot compared to the steam jackets like we use.
Well, I see it looks as though the other laptop dropped out again. We're having a little bit of a connection problem here today. Dan's going to get you back in there real quick. I see we're up to viewership is growing nicely. So again, if you have any questions for Bobby Wilkin or for our panel, this would be a great time to send them in. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the technology while we're on a few-second break here. Again, we're running this off a couple iPhones and a couple of laptops, and take a moment, think about what you could do, how you could use this technology. Usually, the problem we're having today is we're running an auxiliary camera off one of the laptops to try and fit in the nice situation we have there at the table. But it would be possible to do it with just a laptop, and then we'd have a little bit easier time. But here at eLearning, we're always trying to push the envelope a little bit, and sometimes it's a little bit ragged out there on the edge. But I think you'll agree that the subject today is pretty interesting, and it's very, very nice to see the interior views of HooDoo Brewing. I see Dan's bringing up the laptop, but it's going to take a moment to bring it up for just a moment here. So now would be a good time to enable the Q&A app and ask a question if you have. I'm still live here, and that was my big interjection in case we lost signal, was to talk a little bit about the process, which we have done now. So this is the fourth in a series of 4 Teach and Tip Lives that UAF eLearning is bringing you in the fall term, and we'll have 4 more in the spring. And again, they will be conducted via Hangout on Air, and we'll be sending those out via social media at the topics as they're assigned and chosen by our design team. And we hope you'll attend those as well. We're still working with a couple of technical difficulties here for the moment, but I see our viewership continues to climb, so it's nice to see a lot of people hanging with us through this minor technical glitch here. And you can see in the background, this is a working brewery. They are getting ready for service after 3 o'clock. Their licenses only allow them to serve after 3. So again, our purpose here today is strictly academic. I think we're getting close. Let me look over here and just take a moment. Yep, very close. So with that, I'll put the video signal back on the main group and turn it back over to Ben.
Yeah. Sometimes it don't really make sense anymore.
We're back. And you're in the middle
So
of
so the decoction mashing compared with the step mashing, it really kind of comes down to the dollar. So decoction mashing is energy intensive, and if the reward is debatable, if there's any reward at all. It's beer brewing is steeped in tradition though, so a lot of people want to be traditional. And there's definitely a lot of, we do a lot of things that are basically traditional. We use traditional ingredients and do methods that makes us more proud of our beer and makes the beer, I would say, better. But decoction is also very expensive and makes the brew day much longer, which is expensive basically. So it kind of comes down to the reward for going through that process. So I like the step mashing compared to decoction mashing. I think it can yield just perfect beer, essentially, if that existed.
Well, I'm curious, just to take that a little bit further. Have you experimented with some of the older styles just to experience what it tastes like to have a beer that somebody may have brewed centuries ago?
Yes. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, the UK IPA. So I wanted to make just this idea was to make an IPA that someone might have in London in the mid 1800s. So I did just kind of research, well, what would that be? So there's basically there's more or less one type of malt readily available is a malt called Maris Otter malt, which is this funky English malt. So the entire grain bill for that beer is this Maris Otter malt. And we have that shipped over from England, and then the hops are what would be available then would be there's a couple of varieties. We picked a hop called Goldings. So all the hops in that beer are Goldings. And then we mashed at the same temperature they would have mashed at back then, and then the whole process all the way through to the finished beer, we did as much as we could exactly like they did it back then. So that beer, more or less, should taste just like a beer from the 1800s. Most of our beers will try and replicate what that beer should have been, where it came from. You know, our Kolsch is Kolsch basically means brewed in Cologne, Germany. So we try and replicate everything we can do to make that beer exactly like if you were to fly to Germany, go to a brewery, go in Cologne and get a Kolsch. It should taste pretty much just like this. We ship all the same, all the barley comes over from Germany, all the hops come over from southern Germany. The yeast is a Kolsch yeast strain, basically used by a brewery in Cologne. And then we augment our water to mimic the water supply in Cologne, Germany. The German-style brewing system we have, which is actually pretty rare in small breweries, I'd say 95% are not a German style, which allows us to do this step mashing to just try and get it basically exactly like it would be if you were in Cologne, Germany. So we do that with I'd say most of our beers. We're trying to replicate an IPA brewed here, or a Kolsch brewed there, or a Belgian beer, like the Saison we have bubbling way back there. Trying to make that
our camera.
totally
Dan, our
authentic.
camera has dropped out again. I don't know that's the camera, the main feed camera there.
Okay.
We're still getting audio.
Yeah, so we constantly do that. And those beers are great. Beers that are kind of historic, and people loved them back then for a reason, and they were and that people love them now for a reason. They taste very unique, or they just taste good. And what good beer is good beer. It's kind of as simple as that. So we just strive to make the best in all these kind of situations. So.
You said you had about a 2-week lag time between when people take the growlers and they come back to you. You've had like that much of a...
I would say this about when if we come out with a new beer, usually the first day or two are very lots of growler fills, lots of pints, and then it'll kind of peter off, and it's kind of where that levels off. And sometimes it'll come back up as people kind of say, well, I think that's the one I want. It'll almost come back up if it is a good beer. They'll start to, if they get IPA every time, which is a lot of people that get IPA every single time, but maybe they'll go, well, that beer was really good, I'll get that again, and they'll kind of go back to it while it's here, because they might know that it's here only briefly or something like that.
I was going to say a 2-week assessment cycle isn't so bad in the classroom. We've all waited for papers to be corrected longer, but even to give instructors an idea of how their students are doing, that's not really that long of a time.
Unfortunately, we can't react to keep that beer going. We have to plan it into the production cycle, order the ingredients, and those take a while to get here. And then we have to fit it into when we're actually going to brew it, and then we have to wait for it to become beer and package it. So it's really a couple months. If we say we want to brew this beer, we should brew that beer again. It's probably about, maybe we'll see it in February, kind of.
Right. So what do the brewers in Cologne say about your Kolsch? Do they like it? Is it up to par?
As far as, again, I get a lot of, this beer's great, but but I did get a call just on Monday from a guy in Germany, and he's a beer aficionado over there, and he's not in the industry. He's in the stock market, he says, but he loves beer, loves American beer. And he said the Kolsch is better than anything he's ever had, and he's been to Cologne a million times. So he was adamant about it being fantastic. And I've a lot of times, a German will come in, and they'll, a lot of times in the summer, and I'll take the Kolsch, and they're expecting to just be like, yeah, right, this is not Kolsch. But every single time they've said, I was surprised that was actually fantastic. It was very, very good.
So some good data points there.
Yeah, and usually I just start jumping around. And when the German says it's good, I'm pretty happy.
Well, Chris or Karen, do you have anything else you might want to add? Any good opportunity here to ask the brewer any questions? Or
I'm good.
All right. Oh, and do we have any other questions coming in?
We don't have any questions at this time. However, it would be a good time for anyone who's out there in the viewing audience to post your questions via Q&A app, and we will be happy to pass them along to our panel. We'll give you a couple minutes. Sometimes it takes a moment after you post it. It takes a minute or two to actually arrive on this end of things. I'd like to thank those who submitted questions earlier, and it's getting toward the end of our session here. You can hear that they're getting wound up on this end for service, so that's what it's like holding a hangout on air in a live brewery. There are some work noises in the background, but I'm going to pass it back to the panel for a few closing comments, perhaps, and we'll see if any questions show up.
Well, I know at UAF we're almost at the end of our semester, and I know what most faculty and students and designers are doing at this point. Bobby, do you have any upcoming events that folks might be interested in for the brewery here?
We have, we just started doing what we call Cask Saturdays. So we have a few English firkins, they're called, these funky little kegs, and we'll fill them with kind of whatever's in the cellar. So each Saturday we'll tap a new cask. So it's basically just a keg with a big hole in it, and through that hole we can add whatever we want to that single keg of beer. So we'll fill it up, and we've done, we'll add a big dose of fresh hops to it, to IPAs usually, and we've done our stout before. We'll add cocoa nibs, chocolate, vanilla. It's really fun. It's a little 10-gallon experiment. So every Saturday at noon we tap a cask of something. So this Saturday we'll have our new beer that is going to come out on Saturday is a California Common, which is basically a lager brewed at ale temperatures. It's got a real unique beer. So that'll be on Saturday. We'll have a cask of that on Saturday with we jammed a bunch of hops in this cask. And then the following Saturday will be our American IPA with a bunch of Centennial hops in it. And we'll also have a couple reindeer out here in the beer garden on that Saturday, the 20th, for people to get their pictures taken with.
Okay.
And an elf. Should be great.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, Owen, I think that's all for us right here.
Okay, well, great. Thanks very much, Dan. And I'd like to thank Dr. Chris Hartman, Dr. Karen Taylor, and of course, Mr. Bobby Wilkin for sharing his brewery with us today here at our fourth and final Teaching Tip Live of the fall 2014 semester. We'll be talking about our 2015 series after the Christmas break, and we hope and look forward to seeing you then. Thanks very much for joining us today, and we'll have a very nice, happy holidays from all of us here at Elam. Thanks.